Joy Division is a case of its own. The band roughly lasted 4 years, but in that time they built a legacy for the unheard, for the unhappy, and for the damaged. Long story short, Peter Hook and Bernard Sumner went to a Sex Pistols gig and decided, "Hey mate, I wanna do that. We should start a band." A friend joined in the drums, he was replaced with Stephen Morris, and then they got Ian Curtis from a Singer Wanted post without even listening to him first. Right in the spot he was hired. But to fully understand this album and its importance, it's necessary that we know the context. Manchester in the 70s was a grey and industrial place. The economy getaway for most people consisted on working in factories. So much that even the label that released Unknown Pleasures was called Factory Records, for Christ's sake. So it was that or social working. Or drugs. But that's for the city of Manchester. Imagine then living just aside in Salford, an even greyer place with even less life or spirit of change. That of course until punk came to the scene. It was 1976 and people's anger was at boiling point. Sex Pistols, Buzzcocks, Television, The Clash, all of them brought to the people an uplifting sense of self-expression, an escape from the never-ending wake, work, sleep, repeat kind of life that was draining their spirits without them even knowing. At this point in history, a lot of young people met at some gig and started a band inspired by the rebellious acts they witnessed every night on stage. But despite this, only a couple lasted more than a year or two. Who would have thought then that among those who did, we would find such deflection, such reinterpretation of the very own sound they were trying to replicate. Talking about post-punk is complex because it happened, if not at the same time, just right after the great punk rock wave. And that last one made a lot more noise than its self-reflective counterpart. Maybe that's why people first resisted Joy Division sound. Well, that and how badly mastered it was at the beginning. What happened then? What made Unknown Pleasures one of the greatest and most highly praised albums of all time? The answer is really simple, and actually, I already told you. Self-reflection. People didn't just listen to punk rock because of its energy, but because it said something. The message behind Johnny Rodden's words, for example, was sharp, loud, and clear. On the other hand, Ian Curtis's message was deep, introspective, and somber, often transporting the listener to the confines of this collective mind that never ceases to embrace you with its particular darkness. From this order, it is very obvious that we're not listening to the average record. What the hell, the cover alone is telling us, "Hey mate, this ain't be a fun one." But it's the moment we listen to that semi-dead voice that's not trying at all until it does, and then it sounds like it's fighting to breathe, that we realize something's wrong. Not with the band or the music, but with ourselves. Because as sinister as it is, we relate. People have felt to this feeling because it was exactly what they needed. They needed something else than anarchy and pissing off public figures. That's why we went from this to this. Didn't happen overnight though, because this record didn't even chart upon its release. It was more of a sleeper hit, like Nick Drake's timeless classic, Pink Moon. And just like Pink Moon, this record offers something undeniable about human nature itself. But unlike Nick Drake, Joy Division does it in a much darker and foreboding way. That's when the message of Unknown Pleasures, the message of Ian Curtis, kicks in. Maybe they never auditioned Curtis for the job, and maybe they got an unpleasant surprise when they first heard him sing. Just like many of us, don't lie. But the decision proved to be the best. Ian was a deep person. From a very young age, he showed interest in literature, in writing poetry, in writing songs, and all of his influences were very Baroque-ish, very Gothic, all of which is reflected perfectly on his lyrics and work. A person who suffered chronic depression, who was diagnosed with epilepsy just a couple months before the release of his band's debut album, who had met people who died from that disease that was now lurking around him, probably making him paranoid and even more depressed. And this was the very same person in charge of writing those raw but meaningful lyrics about it. Also, you gotta take in consideration that mental illness has always been kind of a taboo in the UK, so just imagine how people felt when they heard this record for the first time. Depression, multiple personalities, bipolar disorder, all summed up in the same package in a deep, relatable, and even poetic way. But guess what? Mental illness ain't exclusive to the UK, it's all over the world, so when the world was exposed to Joy Division's music, there was simply no turning back. And speaking about the music, another great part of this record is the instrumentation the band achieves. We got industrial, electrifying guitar riffs, danceable and even baroque drumming in terms of not leaving any blank space, and what probably gives this record the edge that makes it what it is. The bass lines. Peter Hook's playing is dense, dynamic and engulfing up to the point where his bass alone drives some of the songs. And as far as I'm concerned, this was the first time a band ever explores this kind of musical direction. And you know what else? None of this couldn't have been achieved without the production of Martin Hannett, who was in the very same position than the band in terms of knowledge. Just the basics. All he did was experiment with whatever that for his ears fit the sound of the album, among which are gates and toilets, but he also had a great understanding of what the band wanted and mostly what was best for this record. In both cases, the music and the lyrics complement each other so well, up to the point of creating something that's completely unique and that settled the standards for this dark and cold and new sound that up to this date still resonates within people's minds and souls. At the end, Unknown Pleasures is an album that shaped several generations of musicians to come. Its influence is undeniable, and its legacy will always live on every single person that once felt the despair that lingers beneath our own human feelings. And that was my approach on Joy Division's timeless classic. Thank you so much for watching. If you like what you see, please subscribe, leave a comment, a like, or nothing. I'm just happy with you sticking around. Nothing further but to wish you an excellent day and great music in your life. I'm Tony Whitburn, and I'll see you in the next one.